Hey guys, what's up? It's Nifty Q. Welcome back to another episode of the Wild Wild Web, where I look to explore the digital frontier through in-depth discussions with Web3 industry pioneers. Now today I'm sitting with Star Lordy, CEO of Oniforce, to discuss the state of one of the most exciting PFP projects in the industry currently. Topics we touch on include how Oniforce was saved from collapse by a buyout and change of leadership, what should Collections think about before launching its second or third mint, and their announcements coming at Comic-Con San Diego next week. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Star Lordy, and please remember, nothing you hear on this podcast should be construed as financial or legal advice. That's our vibe, our tribe. The man, the myth, the legend, Star Lordy, here on the Wild Wild Web pod. Excited to have you in, man. I feel like in that pre-episode talk there, I was getting interviewed by you. So I'm glad that the tables are turned now. I get to sit
I'm
here
in the
and
hot
talk with
seat.
you. Yeah, you get to experience that for the next 45 minutes.
Nice.
How's it going?
Great. Very happy to be here. Definitely excited for this one. So thanks for having me.
Amazing, man. Yeah, it's interesting because I do a ton of these interviews and have over the years. And there have only been a certain amount of interviews that I've gone in and really felt like, oh, I need to get this one right. And because of where you guys are at in your timeline, I want to really kind of unpack a bunch of things. One, how you got to this point where the IP, the community, the core team all seems to be aligned in a certain way where you can enter that, in my opinion, that blue chip category very, very quickly here. And so I felt like I needed to get it right. I don't know. Do you feel like that as a founder sometimes? Do you feel like, hey,
I
I
think
need
I
to get
have to
this
get
right?
it right every day, everywhere I go. I think it's a funny question because I did think about that. How like when I was just the project manager before the acquisition, it's like nobody cared about us. So whatever I did was like kind of in a vacuum, and then there was a transition period in the first month or two where I realized like, oh, I'm like becoming a public figure now. Like people actually care what I have to say, and it like impacts the project. And before I could say all sorts of like random ideas, and nobody would care if it happened or not. And now it's like if I say something, everything is alpha, or all of a sudden it becomes like speculation. I'm like, oh.
Do you feel like you guys are on that cusp as well, or is it just me
Oh yeah.
seeing that from the outside?
Oh
You,
no,
you
no,
feel that
we're
as well?
100%. Yeah, I think when we before the acquisition, or I would say like in the beginning of when the acquisition was happening, it's kind of like there was a lot of energy and people being curious about us. Like a lot of people who gave up Oni for dead, like were like, wait a second, like the founders are gone. Like, okay, maybe this thing could be something special again. People who knew the original history, because it was like one of the original blue chips initially, and so um like I would say we were outside of top 10 before, like in terms of by conversation, if not by floor price, but just in terms of like what are the blue chips out there that are still like going and trying, like. And just in the 4 months or 5 months since then, um I would say we're like in the top 5 conversation now, because it's like so many projects have, and people will be like, oh, you flipped this project, you flipped that project. I'm like,
Yeah.
I think they flipped themselves, because we didn't really do anything, like it's almost like we didn't screw up, so that by default we're like rising. But because of the past history and the credibility and the recognition of being like the first anime project, first one of the last blue chips from 2021 to like kind of have a chance to like rise again, that sort of thing,
Mm.
because Pudgy already had their rise. I think Pudgy led the way, but um so yeah, I agree. Like it is a responsibility that I had to come to terms with, is like, before it's like I only had to make the community happy, which was like something that I focus on a lot, and that is easier for me. And then now it's like I have to make the market happy, which is like a totally different ball game.
I love how I was getting, again, the hot seat treatment prior to the episode, but
Yeah.
now we can talk about your psychology, right?
Yes.
Has this swapped to CEO and kind of the front facing point in this collection, in this IP, has that changed how you act IRL in the meat space?
Not really. I'm a pretty down to earth person, and actually I have led um I mean, I've been in the the forefront of like multiple projects and communities in the past. So actually I'm okay with it. It is a little unnerving when people know who you are before you know who they are, because I never ever cared about the spotlight. I never wanted to be like famous. I think there were just different times in my life where it just like started happening, and then with here it's like on a whole different level. And like I was at VCon, and I was with a friend who's not even into NFTs, right? Like he was, well, he's just starting to get into it, but he was there for a different reason, and then he was like inviting a friend over, who I didn't know, and this guy, was connected through like pickleball, which has nothing to do with NFTs, right? And so, but this guy walks up to me, and then the first thing he says is like, "Oh, so you're the guy with the secret sauce?" And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Oni Force," and I was like, "Whoa, Oni Force!" I was like, "Oh shoot, like about Oni?" And so he was like an early holder, and so he kind of watched from the sidelines of like the whole like down and up, and so it was just kind of a surreal feeling when you realize like, oh, okay, there's people out there like talking about you, judging you, like, it's been all positive though, and people are, I mean, luckily, people are rooting for us, so it's not quite the same as like if, I don't know, if you're like a controversial figure and there's like people hating on you all the time, but for me, since I like being low key, like it is a
Yeah.
little odd.
Well, that was an odd comment, to be fair, although positive. So I'm sure
Yeah,
like you said, you're getting more of that. For the
yeah,
uninitiated
yes,
into Oni Force, I do want to get into kind of the
I should
backstory
go
there.
rewind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll rewind, but within that conversation we were just having, you touched on blue chip. I mentioned my co-founder Gift Ed
Mm-hmm.
here, and we host daily shows, and the topic of blue chips comes up a lot, and it's a funny term because some people don't even think that blue chips should
There
be
are no blue
associated
chips.
with any NFTs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested. Like, we look at blue chips and you think, oh, maybe it's just floor price, right? And that gets brought up a lot, but there's probably a little bit more to unpack there. What's your thoughts on blue chip? I mean, you guys again are on that cusp, maybe have been in the past. In my opinion, you have. What's your opinion on that term, blue chip?
It's a great question, because I also agree that like historically the term blue chip is for is bestowed upon a company like after they've established some sort of like continuity, right? Like you could say Ford or GM or Apple or whatever. It's like they've had like many, many, many years to show that they have staying power. I think because our ecosystem is so fragile, like even the biggest project could go to zero like in one day if the wrong things happen, that it's hard to call them blue chips. So it's kind of like we have short memories anyways, and everything happens so fast. So if like a year is like 10 years in Web3, that kind of makes you a blue chip if you made it through the year. But I do think it is premature, and I only use it in the sense that if you're going to call Pudgy or Board Apes or whatever project from 2021 a blue chip, then by default we're a blue chip too, because we did like 140 million in trade volume in the first 60 days. Like we were one of the top projects, at that time, and literally we were being called the blue chip immediately right after launch, which um, I think, though, to answer your question, now I look at it more like cultural relevance on top of like floor price is such like a weird thing to peg the value of your company on, because like we Uniforce as an IP always had the same value and potential value, and now it's starting to show because of the overall sentiment. So I kind of think of it like the way we look at blue chips and NFTs is like, what is the cultural relevance, like how much of like the public conversation and kind of like mind share do you own in the space, and then yeah, like floor price and volume could be part of that as well. So I'd say we're back in the conversation for it, but we still have a lot of work to do before people will like really consider us like on the same level as like a Board Apes or I don't know D Gods or Pudgy, that sort of thing.
I loved your tweet about shipping product for speculation, and it does feel like in 23 we have gotten to the point where NFT projects that want to be considered blue chips, besides like the ones that are associated with art, I think like something like CryptoPunks, like you do have to ship a product. Now it could go in the route of Azuki, and you could like totally flat it, flat on your face.
Yeah.
But I think a lot more in 21 were just based on speculation and that's it.
I agree with that. I think as a space we're maturing. I mean, you have to remember in 2021, it's just all degens up in there, right? Like the stuff, the way you're looking at it is like the vast majority of people who are playing with crypto money have never had to analyze a business P&L or like understand what like their balance sheet might, how that might affect their business or what partners, like what are the things they're doing that actually signals like, hey, they have the right team on board and so it was all just hype. It was just straight up marketing hype. And let's face it, people were printing money with Fiverr art. I mean, that's just like crazy. Like even when that was happening, I was like, yo, this is nonsense. Like there's no other industry in the world where you could ship such a shitty, vague, ambiguous product and then make millions of dollars, right? Like, could you imagine if you walked into a Safeway and there's like some like product with a label that was made with like a Fiverr artist and a Fiverr graphic designer, and then like on the back they're like, well, ingredients may or may not exist, might be poisonous for you, hard to say, we might also just rug this company because we're all anonymous. Like there's like you that wouldn't fly in the real world. Like the average consumer would be like, I'm not buying this, I don't get it. That's why the average consumer does like blue chip brands. They like that label to say a name that they understand has value. Like there's a reason why a Honda has more resale value than a Ford or something, right? Because they've established that history through their execution. So now, yeah, you have to ship product because it is still very much a mindshare kind of attention economy. However, if you're going to make your community happy, you have to ship product. You have to make sure that it prioritizes them, that it delivers something that they feel is value. Like that value, unfortunately, a lot of it right now is like, do their bags go up? But there are other intangibles like how strong is your community? How do you feel like with the people you connect with? Like I've always said, fun is a utility. Look at 10KTF. Like people, none of their holders care about the floor price. Like their topic of conversation is just always like, oh, what's going to happen in this next part of the story? So they've really made engagement a utility in a lot of ways. Now, maybe for traders, they don't like that as much because they do care about floor price and things. But I think NFTs need to diversify more and move out of just the collectible, like kind of speculative market into like things that either like solve problems for people or like actually enhance their lives somehow.
So before we go any further, let's get into your backstory. Let's kind of like some foundation of like who were you before even Star Lordy? Like what were you doing? Were you? I'm assuming that's not your given name. So let's get
Unfortunately
into a
not.
little.
I'm kidding.
Let's get into your background as well as telling a little bit of that story of Oni Force for the uninitiated.
Sure, yeah. Basically, in terms of my personal backstory, I think for what's relevant to Oniforce, you could really start all the way back to childhood, which is that as a kid, I my first dream was actually to be a comic book artist, and that's all I wanted to be. I just love comic books. I am a huge, Marvel nerd, and later DC I started liking more, but I love drawing. I love storytelling. Um, Somewhere like in middle school, I fell in love with filmmaking, and then literally like for the next 15 years or something, all I did was dream of being like a big time filmmaker, and was just always working on that. And then ended up starting my own production company and started doing like a lot of like corporate work. So I was doing well, I actually started as a wedding videographer when I was like 19, but I ended up going into corporate stuff. And because I'm based in San Francisco, I had a lot of tech clients. So I kind of was lucky enough to work with like Google and Facebook and Mozilla and like, eventually hundreds of startups. Like I just had a lot of experience in the tech industry and understanding how they work, the industry works, and also like being in the room and like seeing an inside like of like the people actually like building the future, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
people having conversations about social media and VR and all this stuff, and like really seeing like how the sausage was made. And since, you know, in that industry, they are not very media savvy or not very artistic, like I kind of created this niche for myself where I was at the intersection of like technology and storytelling, where I really understood technology really well, but also because I'm a storyteller and artist, so I also understand like what actually moves people, what builds communities, like. And then on top of that, I started an art blog with a group of friends in 2009, where it ended up being like one of the top 3 art blogs in the world. Like we were getting like the first year we had like 1.8 million unique visitors, and then like eventually like within a couple of years we had like 30 volunteers around the world working for free. We're doing art shows at like Basel and South by Southwest, and we're on track for like 5 million unique visitors a year. And this is all like 100% organic. And so we really became champions for artists, like we helped develop a lot of artists, find them and then develop their careers and get them exposure. And I got very disenfranchised with the art world itself because I discovered it's like very, very political, and like the way that it's gate kept. And then so we kind of disbanded because also we were just like a group of friends that had our own like dreams, like filmmaking, design, all that stuff. But the reason why I tell you all these things is that I ran my production company for a while. I was doing TV commercials, was never happy with it. When the pandemic hit, I kind of hit the reset button. I went like full on nerd again. I was just hardcore going into comics and anime and manga and just like losing myself in that and reading a bunch of sci-fi, etc. And then when NFTs came along, when I learned how smart contracts work, that was the thing that got me. Actually, I didn't care about the money or the speculation or flipping. I thought it was kind of nonsense. Like,
Hmm.
I just when I realized like, oh, like the smart contracts, like that's how you could protect artists. Like that's what got me in. And so I was like, the thing that we've been waiting for the whole time that when we're running that art site is finally here, And so, especially for digital artists.
You mentioned your love of filmmaking. I'm interested in like what stories you like to tell and in what format you like to tell them. Kind of.
As a filmmaker, I've always loved more like art house indie, like European, Asian films, or just like actual cinema. Like Scorsese is cinema, right? Like that sort of stuff. Like, and um, so I've always been in a narrative, and particularly, I think I like things that create emotions. Um, and then I've done a bunch of documentary work too. I do care about like social issues and just understanding the human condition.
You mentioned the art scene and um, kind of getting fed up with how it's run in the process and how political it is. Does that carry over to the NFT art scene? Because that's I'm much more of a gamer. I'm much more of a collector. I
Yeah.
rub shoulders with people who do the NFT art scene and all these things. But does that carry over from someone with your experience in the traditional art space?
There's some carryover. I think by nature, like if you have a platform, then you start controlling. You have an influence in the narrative. You can control, um, like the way that people enter or the way that artists are perceived. Like, but because of the just ethos of decentralization, it's also like takes what social media started to like the next degree, which is like if you are an artist and people love your art and you have your own platform, you now have more tools to like create more experiences and more loyalty and revenue and protect yourself in a lot of ways. So I still think it's a much better place to be a fine artist in Web3. And I think in general, especially at this time, people are much more loving, and like if you're in it, especially as an artist, you probably like and you're still here, then that means you like really believe in it. And so, yeah,
So where did Star Lordy come into this equation? Was it like pre NFTs, or was that something you found though when you got to Web3?
that was a Web3 thing. You know what's funny is that people think that it's because of like Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's actually not. Like
That didn't cross my mind at all, actually. But I
okay,
get the I get
that's
the
cool. Yeah, some people think it is, but there might be some parallel ish, I guess. Like he's kind of goofy and I'm kind of goofy, but really like it was kind of a joke because this is also by the way is embarrassing, shows how green I was because when I was like signing up for Discord and I was like, oh, I need like a username, and so I was like, oh, I'll just do like this is like before joining OnlyForce, and I didn't know what I was getting into. So it's kind of like Star. Like I thought like, oh, like I want to be like kind of like a light or or something positive, and then Lordy, because like I was like, oh Lordy, like what am I getting into kind of thing. Like it was just kind of like my own joke. And like literally when I typed it in, I thought like, oh, I'll just change it like whenever I figure out what username I really want. And then once I went in and I realized like, oh, I'm not allowed to change it now. Like, this is my identity.
Yeah, now you can't leave.
Yeah, I can't. I don't get to leave and I don't get to change my name because, yeah, I found out there was some history back with Uniforce of like kind of having a founder do like two different like characters that wasn't like too well received and
Yeah.
things like that.
I want to get into the backstory with Oniforce here, but just like staying with you in that timeline with NFTs, what were some of those initial collections, whether they be in art or PFPs, that drew you in, and maybe the first that you encountered that drew you in, but then also once you kind of dove into the ecosystem, which ones did you find that really stuck with you?
You know, honestly, Uniforce was the first project that made me appreciate art in PFP collections. I think I think Bored Apes actually has aged really well, and now I consider that art pretty iconic. You know what I mean? I think that art is actually perfect because there's like an infinite number of ways you could have drawn a monkey, right? But the way they did it like was actually perfect for what is needed. But at the time, I thought, okay, especially with all the fiber art that was coming, I was like, what is this shit? I just, I'm like coming from like the actual art world where I'm working with like artists that are like in the MoMA or like their paintings are like $100,000 or something, and it's like you have to be like an artist that spends like 20 years of your life or more just to get to that status. And so like coming into this space and seeing people print money on Fiverr art was like I was like, what? Like it's like a slap in the face, you know? And so honestly, I didn't like almost any project. Not that I was like against them, it's just I just wasn't interested. And so I was more interested in understanding like talking to the G Moneys or the Snowfros of the world and trying to understand like, okay, like why is this generative art more valuable than that? Or like why do people think this is like et cetera. And so I started off like exploring that, but honestly, Uniforce was the first one. When I saw the art, I immediately loved it. Where I was like, okay, PFPs could actually be dope. Like this is to me, Uniforce was the high art PFP project, which I did find out later that was the intention. It was supposed to be an art
Yeah.
project. And so I didn't have too much exposure to other projects in that. Maybe like After Order, which is a cool project by this artist Ramon that we're actually working with right now, which is cool. It's kind of like a card game thing. And then, there was a bunch of projects actually I probably would have tried getting into, except to be honest, by the time I discovered them, the floor prices were already like insane. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'm from the outside looking in.
I almost want to say like, how could you, if you're in the NFT space, not know about Oniforce? But I don't want to
Yeah,
even
yeah,
like be that exclusionary because
yeah,
there's a lot of projects in NFTs. Like I hear
yeah,
about projects on Solana, on Arbitrum, on Ethereum that I don't even know about. So
yeah.
for those people that don't know about Oniforce and this like rich and kind of up and down history,
Hmm.
kind of give us a TLDR and let's dive in.
Absolutely. So Uniforce is the first anime PFP project. It's the first sideways PFP project. Apparently, it's the first left-facing PFP as well. And then, yeah, some holder told me that. And then on top of that, the founders, especially the developer Crypto Spaces, they actually created the whitelist, which is now known as the allow list. Which so Oniforce is it minted in August 2021, right after Bored Apes, and it was an original blue chip just by the fact that it shot up to a 70th floor like immediately and had a lot of celebrity owners from Gary Vee to Snoop Dogg to Steve Aoki, like that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, because the original founders as a group were not really prepared or experienced to handle like a success of that level and also a global brand, it quickly fell. By the time I came in early 2022, it had just gone from 70 to zero point 0.2. So you could imagine how gnarly that was in the community and how much trust was broken for that to fall so quickly. But that turned into a silver lining because about a year later we managed to sell the company and exit all the founders, brought on really great new ownership, um, and now we get to live the dream and like kind of go back to like achieving what we set out for the community, which is to basically just be like the greatest anime project to be birthed out of Web3 and try to like actually translate into the real world. Yeah.
I'm really focused in on how you guys tell a story. Obviously, like I do want to
Yeah.
get to that, but while we're still in this timeline of you guys maybe selling, you mentioned you guys sold the company. I'm just interested in these
Yeah.
details. A new
Yeah.
ownership came in, inputted you as CEO, and what
Yeah.
was your role in the company prior to that? I kind of just want to unpack that
Oh
for a second.
yeah. So when I was brought on early 2022, I was actually I initially just volunteered because I heard there was some problems behind the scenes. I wasn't really clued in on the drama. I initially, when I had lunch with, I think it was JR and William, my my friend William Tong, um, and I just offered casually. I was like, "Oh, if you guys need help, let me know." And then the next day, William calls me and is like, "Hey, can you actually be the project manager?" And I was like, "Wow, that sounds like a cool opportunity because like I really genuinely love the art. I thought it was my favorite art PFP, and it's a still had a brand name to it. So in terms of building my career, I'm like, yeah, sure." And but I didn't know what a crazy mess it was. And after the first 2 weeks of working like literally 100 hours a week, I was like, oh, actually, I think I need to get paid for this, guys. Like, I don't think this is like a volunteer position, like, and
You were
so
volunteer
so I start
project
off.
manager.
I was a volunteer project manager for the first 2 weeks. Again, I was very green. I had no idea what that really meant in Web3. So I had a pretty steep learning curve. But then for a year, I was a project manager. And then, crazy, believe it or not, they never incorporated their company. So we had to incorporate like almost like a year later. And so by default, I ended up becoming CEO.
How much did Oni Force raise in their mint, and they didn't incorporate?
Dude, like over $10 million, dude.
That's a great crypto story. That is so degen.
Only in crypto, bro. Could you imagine that? You make over $10 million essentially overnight, and then you have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in royalties coming in every month, and you literally have no company to even like manage it. Like
Wow.
it's the most degen thing you could like possibly imagine.
Okay, so when you guys incorporated, then you transitioned to the CEO
CEO.
role. Okay,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. And then I decided to stay on with the new ownership.
got it. Okay, I really am fascinated in this idea that like DAOs or protocols can like acquire other DAOs and protocols. Like uh, NFT projects is another example. Maybe this isn't the exact parallel to that, but do you think this will happen more, or do you think this is kind of an outlier situation where one team that essentially launched the project can't really get it to where it needs to go, and so another team either acquires or buys out that current IP. You kind of get where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I do think we're headed that way. I think just as a group, we're pretty excited by what Web3 brings in terms of DAOs and just the idea of decentralized everything or giving more power to people. So, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of it. And what I'm hoping is that we start teaching other Web2 companies how to incorporate that into their business model, you know?
I'd love to kind of dive into the lore behind Omniforce and kind of just breaking down what the ecosystem looks like today. So, what do you guys have going on, and kind of what is that lore foundation that you guys build off from?
Got it. Yeah, so we were the first project to actually have a real lore and storytelling aspect to a 10K set, in terms of like there was like a story, the initial community and the mods and stuff were writing like tons of lore and developing the characters. So you could kind of think of ourselves as like a Star Wars universe if Star Wars was more like Blade Runner meets Naruto or something, right? Like it's kind of like it's sci-fi, but it's kind of punk and it's kind of like um fantasy too, right? So it's like you would have characters that might have like energy attacks or things like Dragon Ball or mystical things. So it's not quite um as like Western as Blade Runner. And so that's kind of the universe we live in. The initial collection, the Genesis, was 7,777 characters that live in the Enclave, which is our name for kind of the whole like area that they live in, which you could imagine like almost like a Manhattan or a Neo Tokyo or something like that. And yeah, and so those Genesis characters represent like the core types of characters, but there's a much bigger, rich world that we're building out in terms of like explaining different social classes, going beyond the walls of the Enclave, where it's kind of like the Enclave is, yeah, I would say it would be more like a Hong Kong or something, right? Where it's like kind of its own like territory, and then as we expose more of the world, you'll realize like, oh, there's like Avatar, there's different permutations of Oni in different, that originated from different geographies that have different, cultures and physical attributes. And then there's like all these other creatures and beings that live in the world, just like in Star Wars. So you'll have like from androids to monsters to demons, that sort of stuff. So it's a really rich world that's very unique.
One of the most dynamic things I think with NFTs, specifically PFPs, is how you continue to build out that story, maybe launch other collections that do tell that story, but also appease your current holder base. And like it's such a dynamic and complex situation that some NFT projects don't even do it.
Right.
Oni Force has is one of the most prominent collections that doesn't have a secondary mint
Yep.
or anything like that. How do you kind of look at that situation where, okay, we need to continue to tell our story, we potentially need to get more folks in at like not a 1 ETH price that's still like pretty expensive for a lot of people? How are you breaking down that convo within your kind of organization?
That's a great question. And that's actually one of the most important things for us to figure out because, like you said, we never diluted. I think actually, in hindsight, one of the benefits of failing early and failing small is that we actually didn't make any of the mistakes that these other projects have. And honestly, we probably would have. Like if we were just still going full tilt boogie, it would be like, okay, time for a second collection, time for a token, time for a metaverse, like all this nonsense that like, we wouldn't even know what that means at the time. And we're just doing what everybody else is doing. So now we have this luxury where it's like, oh, we could actually see every move that people have made. And even like Azuki recently, like that was the big one I think everybody was waiting for to see how that would impact the market. And obviously there was historic what happened in a not good way. But we learned a lot from that. And actually, I will say Azuki did certain things right. Like I think their Bobu and their beans are actually amazing ways to get people into their ecosystem, which didn't really dilute the value of the original in any way. So I think it's a lot of it's about the expectations you set up. For sure, if you drop a 20K collection, PFP collection, you are now entering into the, diluting like what happens. Yeah, like that's very tricky, but we're far from that.
Yeah, if you had a magic wand or you became, and I know you already got enough work on your hands with
Yeah,
Omniforce, but
it's
I'm just
okay.
saying in this
Yeah.
hypothetical universe where you become the CEO of Azuki, what would you do? What's the one thing you would do there after already this
I
mishap?
mean, first of all, I wouldn't charge 2E. I mean, like in this market, I don't know how you could analyze this market and say it's okay to take out $40 million of liquidity out of like your own community's hands without like any actual way of like creating more demand to onboard more people so that way the price doesn't go down, like, and I'm just speculating. I'm guessing obviously it's not like there's look, I don't think anybody in Azuki was planning on this to happen, right? It's not like they're sitting. I'm hoping and I'm imagining it's not like they're sitting in some room like, oh, we're gonna get $40 million out of our community. Like it's more like my guess is that it was like, yo, our floor is like 15. 2 is like a very fair price for like entry into the collection, and because of like our like kind of blue chip status and value and all this stuff, like the price will probably go up. Is I'm guessing what they thought, right? Because like I'm I'm assuming, if everybody has good
Hmm.
intentions. However, if you're saying to people that you want more people to enter the ecosystem, like 2 ETH is not the price point that you do that. You know what I mean? Like, and also I think their challenge is like they probably if imagine if they had only sold to the public, then the holders would be like, what the fuck, right? But then they sold only to their holders, and then the holders are like, what the fuck, because they got boned,
So at
right?
least
Like
they didn't hurt the
everybody,
public.
yeah, in a way, but like I think I was talking with a whale about this. Like even 10 million out the ecosystem right now would have been a little bit tough for everyone, but 40 million like nuked us, dude. Like it, you could see how every project was affected by that. So if I was CEO, I would probably have first of all dropped a totally different collection. Like I don't know why you would drop the same art and then distribute the rare traits and make them common, because like literally if somebody's spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to get their hands on a specific trait, you don't give that trait to, you know, 1,000 more people, like that. Just visually, what I really
Yeah.
learned from the Azuki thing is the art does matter. Like, it's not just like, oh, they dropped a collection. It's like, what does the art mean to people? Like, what kind of expectations does it create, and how does that affect speculation? Because if you just want a cheap entry point in Azuki and look cool, you're overjoyed because now you can get a grail for like 1 ETH, right? And then, but if you're a whale and you accumulated a lot and you spend a bunch of money and those things matter to you, then you're probably really unhappy. So I think their miscalculation was probably the type of art they dropped. I think there is a chance that even with the liquidity shock and stuff, if the art was like super original, very, very different, didn't create confusion in the market, all that stuff, it could have maybe had a better reception. So if I was CEO of Azuki, I would actually, I mean, look, this is going to be a hot take, so no disrespect to, that community, since we have so many people in the community who also are Oni holders that we love. If I was CEO, though, I would have taken it a little slower, had more of a first principles approach of like storytelling. Like, because I know like another criticism was like they delivered this amazing trailer, and then like the collection that they dropped seemed to have very little connection to it. And when
Hmm.
people asked for like a connection, there was like no explanation, right? And so, like, why is this super badass tiger looking dude, and then that guy's not in the collection somewhere, right?
It was weird timing too because all of these anime projects that are playing off this narrative and launching now, it all happened within a week. Ether captains
Yeah,
Azuki, and it was like all of
yeah,
them got it wrong in their own
yeah.
way.
Okay, so it's funny you say that. This is why it is not a criticism to Azuki. I'm just saying what I would do differently as a CEO is I would actually go back to the beginning, look at it from first principles in terms of storytelling, and say, okay, like if this was an actual anime, what kind of world would this be? Right? Like, how can we make sure that the collection makes sense for the world? Because, like, to be honest, when I look at the original collection for Azuki, it's quite obvious that they optimize it for community building and status versus like storytelling, right? Because so I sometimes I'll pull up a collection and I'll just stare at the collection and look at all the traits, because it's almost like you can see the soul of the intention behind it. Because like as a you know founder or a operator myself, like I can look at something and know like, okay, what type of conversations was this team probably having for this trait to appear, you know what I mean? And it's like, and the way I realized this is I was looking at Oni Force's collection. I was just literally I just sometimes I'll just scroll through and look at the art, and then one day it hit me. I was like, wait a second, if we want to make an anime, every single trait needs to make sense logically in this world. Like in this world, why is there like 500 people with a kitsune mask, 500 people with like a tengu mask? Like, are they a clan? Like, do they choose? How do they choose the mask? Does the mask choose them? Like, does it like represent their personality? Like you need like logic behind it. You know what I mean?
I,
Storytelling logic.
Yeah, and dude, that totally like is spot on with what I see coming out of Oni Force. Like you can feel that with Oni is like you guys have such a emphasis on storytelling, and you're one of those select few that I think really place it and highlight it. How do you balance telling the story from like a community originating that I like that lore and the core team? Because one of the really cool things about Bored Ape is that they've allowed some of their community to tell the story. Like I understand like
Mhm,
the main story is being told by Yuga, but
mhm.
it feels like the community is also taking that responsibility and saying we're creating all these different type of things? How do you balance the community piece and your guys' creation of that lore?
That's a great question. I mean, that's literally the central thing that we had to focus on is first of all, I think Bored Apes Yuga has the greatest decentralized brand building experiment in like the history of mankind. Like you've never seen this happen before. That's why I love Bored Apes. I love the culture, the community. I think they're amazing. I think Yuga has had the right balance of, like you said, like allowing community members to contribute, and then like when they see something that works, they'll like kind of bring it into what they're working on, which is like genius. And I think we're taking that to the next step, which is why, for instance, we created the franchise model, where the way we imagine it now is like if you own a PFP, an Oni PFP, you're now essentially buying the right to do business with us. So if you want to start a coffee company or you want to start your own comic book series, like not only are we going to say yes, go off and do it, but if you want help, like we'll do it. Like we'll give you insight to the lore. We'll help you, like, with marketing assets or resources or distribution, and really try to have like um, a centralized support network or infrastructure that is for a decentralized purpose, if that makes sense. So it's really just iterating a little bit more on what Yuga is doing. It's kind of like the way I would pitch is like if Lucas Arts decided to help fund and support fan fictions, right? So it's like because especially since we're so story based, I realized from the community very quickly, it's like you don't want to spend time and money developing a story that might not fit in canon, right? Like you want it to be as close to what is going to come out as possible. So the way we've been balancing it is incorporating community members who are super active into actually giving us feedback on our lore and our canon and asking questions and like helping us like poke holes in it and develop stuff. And then when they want to develop their own things, we're going to be having like we're literally right now working on like our own Bible, our own kind of version of a Wikipedia, where it's like all these questions you might have, like we'll be able to answer them for you and then provide support.
Do you have a main character of Oni? Like Curtis is widely known. I think Blue the Coda is widely known. Board Apes, like other collections have a little bit of that. Is there a main character yet in Oni?
I would say not yet. I think that's the whole point. Like we're basically what we're launching in our first two comic book series is a team book, which is essentially like our X-Men with 7 main characters. So I think those will be like key characters, and then there's Oni Hunter X, which is kind of like our Wolverine type, which he is kind of our main character right now, where it's actually really cool. The community actually developed that character. So we actually went through like a process for 3 or 4 months where every week we were meeting up and actually working on the lore and like designing what the backstory of that character was, what his motivations were, all this key stuff before we allowed a writer to kind of take that on and turn it into a comic book series. But to me, that's like the character we're going to be promoting a lot because of the fact that the community like literally like built him, and we just facilitated that.
Comic Con San Diego was able to see that you guys released that. That would be a great thing to dive into. And then any other, I guess, upcoming pieces that Oni Force is really diving into.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Comic Con is huge for us because we were actually the first Web3 project to premiere at San Diego Comic Con. And now we're the first project to go back to actually have a preview of the comic books that are eventually going to be distributed worldwide in comic book stores and bookstores around the world. So we are actually going to be the first and only Web3 project with worldwide distribution in retail stores for our stories, which, if you look at the Pudgy play with toys, it's like we're doing the same thing in the comic book world. And so obviously going back to Comic Con is a huge moment for us. And just for the community, I think it's a great validation because it's like we are now presenting a character that the community helped build together and they actually get to share in that like kind of winning moment. And so for us, I think it'll be a moment of history. We have a really big announcement that's coming along with it. And yeah, so it's a good feeling.
Yeah, yeah. Two questions based on that. One, do you get any like weird looks at Comic Con when you know kind of talk about Web3 and that piece? And then I guess how does the distribution work within those comic books? Are you adding additional utility for holders potentially, or how does that supply look what you're distributing out. I'm not familiar with comic book releases, so I don't know what looks
Yeah.
right.
So basically, I mean, first of all, it is a tricky. That's a very astute observation because unfortunately, a lot of communities that should love NFTs, like because of the bad press, like are against them, and gaming is one, comic books are another. So really, the way we're positioning it is, if anybody, look for the art and the storytelling, we think it's awesome. Like anybody should love it. So we're just leading with that, but we're not going to hide the fact that we're an NFT project. I think though, if somebody who's really against NFTs wants to know what we're about, I would say that we started off as a company that raised money through NFTs, and NFTs are like a really big part of what we're doing, but we're now growing way beyond that into being like a legitimate technology platform that, you know, creates anime IP and stuff. Um, so I haven't been to Comic Con representing OnlyForce since, uh, you know, or at any point, but I think so I haven't had any of the conversations yet, but just from me going to cons, I know it's a very difficult conversation in 2022 or 2021 when it was still like things were great. I went to a convention and I asked this really famous like comic book artist. I was like, "Yo, what do you think about NFTs?" And he looks at me and goes like, "They're fucking stupid." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Conversation over."
Doesn't it suck when like the people that you think will be super progressive just because they've been creative in their
Yeah.
own industry like have no capacity to think about NFTs in any other way?
Yeah, it is the bad press, and also a lot of it's deserved though. I mean, look how much liquidity has been sucked out by people with like terrible intentions. I mean, let's be real. There's almost no other industry aside from crime where like so many people are dubious in what they've done and how they do it. Like, could you imagine if you went to a neighborhood and every restaurant that was on the block, well, we might spit on your food, there might be cockroaches in here, like
Yeah.
you don't know, there's no standards, like we just do whatever the fuck we want, like that's not real food, like, you know, like people wouldn't eat there, you know, but somehow with NFTs, like we just kept pouring in more millions and millions. So I think we have a ways to go, and part of our job is to actually be a positive uh, example of what NFTs can be, which again is trying to impact people's lives with meaningful storytelling and meaningful characters. You know, in terms of the distribution, I think obviously we have to provide utility to holders. One idea I've had for the longest time, which I think we're probably going to do, is when we do a drop, like let's say an issue comes out, before it goes to retail, we'll probably give the first printing rights to the holders. So that way, for instance, like, you know, first printings matter, right? Like they're worth more usually. And then whenever a comic is popular, they keep reprinting them, and you'll find like up to fifth printings and more in stores. And the value obviously drops each time. Item, so there could be nothing more valuable than giving someone like the first printing of a first comic book, right? Like if you had the first printing of the first Superman comic, you're literally like a millionaire. You know what I mean? And so like the idea I had to provide utility that I think our holders would like is like when we do a drop, we have an open mint where it's like super cheap, right? And they buy the NFTs that represent, and then the community sets the actual first print run. So if only 1,000 copies are ordered, like let's say you want to order 10 copies yourself, and then I order 50 copies, and then what happens is like we set the initial print run, which also affects the value, right? And then the cool part is like as a holder, we could combine a drop shipping to do is hold on to the NFT. We're now giving you like reseller privileges. So you could go turn around and sell that NFT later. And then whoever burns it will redeem it for a physical copy. But we could just hold the stock for you. So you're not getting like 50 comics shipped to you and then you got to mail it to someone. You know, we could just take a piece of it for those services, like, which would make the NFT more valuable the longer you hold it, like a 1-to-1. Um, but it's also deflationary in the sense that every time you redeem a comic, you're burning an NFT. So I think that would be one cool mechanic that we could do to provide like really good utility for holders. Aside from like in the future, we'll have holders include their IP in there, and they could get royalties, and there's advertising space with sponsors in the comics, like that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I have you for a couple minutes, and I want to get this last couple questions in. And the Origin marketplace is interesting to me because I think you can tell a little bit about the soul of a project too. You were mentioning this on
Mhm.
like looking at the art, but really, if the project is attempting to have, I guess, the trading or the collecting go through something that is maybe something more creative focused or more collector focused than Blur, you can see a little bit of the way that they think about these things. So, give me your take on
Yeah,
Origin Marketplace, and I'd love your take on Blur as well. I know that's kind of a over talked about subject,
hot
but
topic.
I would love it.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a huge factor. Origin, first of all, they've always been a champion for artists and creators. They've done many big drops with individual artists and been successful in the past. They came to me and they were like, "Hey, we want to provide um, more resources to your holders so they could get more perks." So the idea is that we could do a marketplace where we actually provide prizes, as opposed to Blur. It's like very beholden to what they decide to give you. So Origin basically is like decided to take our existing marketplace, add Blur like functions where we're tracking points and then rewarding people for their trading behavior, but we're rewarding them with prizes that we think our community would like. So to keep our community more engaged, um, they will have they pay the same royalty. It's only 0.5%, but they get perks that if you're an actual fan of Oni, like you would love these perks more than some random ambiguous thing. Um, yeah, and so we love what it means for us. It means that as we keep developing cool prizes that our community will love, and it doesn't really change like what they need to do. They just need to decide to use us instead of Blur. And then in terms of Blur, honestly, I don't have a good take on it yet because I hear people think it's terrible for the market, and then people who think it's good for the market. And unfortunately, I'm not enough of a trader to like be able to say for sure.
Mm.
It's obvious they have impacted floor price and then created volatility in floor price that maybe wouldn't have existed in the same way. Some people also say though that it incentivizes people to even trade. Like there would probably be less volume overall, maybe. But also, if you're only paying 0.5%, I don't know. I mean, look, I always expected the royalties to go down to zero just because that's how like markets work. If you give a trader the option to not pay a percentage, then they're not going to pay it. So I don't even blame Blur for that. They're not even the first to do that, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm
Looks
a little
I
neutral,
think.
to be honest. I'm waiting to see what happens. Yeah, looks. I think it was looks rare, but that marketplaces were flirting with 0%. I knew we were cooked. Like that's just inevitable, you know.
Yeah, listen, I know we're dealing with some laggy issues, so apologies for that. But Starlord, you've been awesome throughout this entire discussion, man. I appreciate you coming in and dropping all the information related to Oni Force and your takes on the market and kind of that history of the project. So it's been a great convo. Can I squeeze any last bit of alpha out of you before you head on to whatever
Yes.
inevitable Twitter Spaces you're at next?
So yeah, so we're expecting to make a really big announcement between July 22nd and 24th at Comic Con. It's really big for us because it's a move forward in terms of our um, exposure as an IP in the Web2 world, and so definitely look forward to that. Plus, we're going to be announcing new kind of prizes and perks that we're going to be giving to the community. So I think it's going to be a really good time.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you stopping by again. Hopefully, we can get you on the channel relatively shortly here, maybe in
Yeah.
August. It'd be great to talk to you again.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a great interviewer. Ask great questions. I would love to be on anytime. So we could do something in August as well.
Yeah, Gifted is making sure that I load up on OniForce as well. So know that he has y'all's back, trying to get me to load up on the bags.
Oh yeah, we love that guy. I mean, I met him in person finally in LA, and he was such a great, charming dude, and appreciate what he does for the. We're on it.
Awesome, man. All right, thanks again. Star Lordy, you've been amazing. CEO of Oni Force. Look forward to what you guys are building out for the NFT space, man. You guys are doing a fantastic job.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate you.